Okay, dual representation. Dual representation, as we said, is viewing a symbolic object as both as an object and a symbol. And it's the ability to actually extract information from the symbolic representation. It is mastered around age 3, but it keeps developing. Do not focus too much on ages. I mean, I'd like you to know what comes before, what comes after, roughly. But as I said, mastered around age 3. I can tell you a lot of research that shows it's later when the task is made more difficult versus earlier when the task is made easier. So this is more of an average. Adult teaching here can help. For example, what are certain tools of dual representations that we learn information from? One of them is maps, right? Because it symbolically represents space. And by looking at a map, you gain information about where something is located. It could be also photos, drawings, make-believe playthings, etc. And exposing children to these diverse symbols, pointing out their similarities with the real world, overall providing children with experience at home may foster their dual representation development. Ne oldu? Gökçe? Okay. All right. Okay. No, Gökçe looked scared and looked at the ceiling. Now, I thought there was a bug or something, so, which would have made me stop class and ask someone to valiantly get rid of it. This is for kulak dolgunluğu right now. Okay? This is for just knowing about. I'm going to talk more about this in 350. I will not ask a question about this. So, criticism of Piaget's preoperational stage. The main criticism has been stages. We don't seem to have a board marker, but okay. So, efendim? Oh, thank you very much. So you remember, when we talked about stages, we thought we characterized them like separate planes. There were abrupt shifts, right, from one stage to the next. The idea was that once you got to a stage, all of your thinking, all of the problem solving you engaged in, your thinking in those problem solving tasks resembled a particular way of thinking that is characteristic of this stage, right? So say this is pre-operational, right? This is concrete operational. This is formal operational. Now, if the stage theory holds, you expect that, say, there are different conservation tasks. There could be length, there could be mass, volume, so on and so forth. Let's take length and quantity. Let's take quantity. So the idea could be that if the child is in one stage, their performance in quantity and their performance in length are going to be at that stage, right? For the stage theory to work. But if the child, say, is performing at pre-operational level at quantity, but for some reason is performing at a higher logical level at length, then that is a problem for the stage theory. You see what I'm saying? Who's not? Talk to me after class. And so what it is that you expect the child to be in the same stage, the same level of thinking for all similar tasks, regardless of content. If there are these inconsistencies, then it is called a horizontal décalage. And so this was the main criticism for Piaget's theory, because it is telling you there are uniform ways of thinking, right? Preoperational children think similarly across, so they keep committing the centration error, for example, every time they see a conservation task. But what happens if the child gets a lot of practice and external experience with a certain type of stimuli? What happens if children are street children, they're selling flowers, and they keep exchanging money, for example? Think of a 6-year-old who's selling salpak. Is it possible that child knows more about quantity as compared to another child who doesn't get that kind of experience? It's possible. If you can show that that child's reasoning is at a different level, then this would become a problem for the original way that Piaget thought about these stages. And that was one of the big criticisms. We're going to talk more about this. Yes?
Can we say Piaget was kind of wrong when separating the stages very
Is it so? I mean, that's the big question. That's why so much research was generated. They have done conservation tasks in ways that simplified the task. They made it more child-friendly. They gave interventions. They gave conservation interventions and looked at whether children, for example, could be trained to pass conservation tasks, although they hadn't yet passed to the next stage. There is a lot of literature on this. What we do know for sure is that if you take conservation tasks the way Piaget envisioned them and do administer them to current school-aged children, you get very similar results. He was interested in coherent ways of thinking, right? And so his theory makes that he has divided it in these ways to demark where a certain logic, a certain way of thinking shifts to a different way of thinking. Meaning, a child who's not able to decenter, for example, or reverse, is able to reverse and decenter, right? So in his theory, it is very coherent. It makes a lot of sense as to why he divided it the way he did. But we will see core knowledge theories. We're going to talk about that right after we finish Piaget. I think you may find them to be a little bit more lenient, a little bit more inclusive of children's expertise. And so, okay, and I am going to this is just a summary. Yes, concrete operational stage. So by 7 to 11 years, children are able to conserve, they are able to decenter and reverse, they have better classification skills, they can engage in seriation, meaning putting things in order according to one feature. Using transitive inference, meaning if this one is shorter than this and this one is shorter than the other one, it should be then A, B, and C. So they are basically using transitive inference based on one stimuli to infer something about the next and carrying that over. And spatial reasoning using cognitive maps and map skills. All right. So limitation. So what it is but how is it that if children can do all of these things, why is this not the last stage, but it's the third, right? One before last. It's because although they can carry out these operations, they still need the objects themselves. So they can't do it abstractly in their mind. They're still tied to reality in a way. That's why it's concrete operations. So they have problems with abstract ideas. They have problems with thinking, like long word problems that ask them about these abstract entities, the transformations, resulting stage. But when you give the problem physically to them, they can engage in decentration, They can engage in reversibility. Yes, Yaren.
Often they have the ability to make mental representations, but not solving problems mentally.
It doesn't seem like it's the same thing. A mental representation could be very static. You could represent your memories in time, for example. That is different than constructing a story, which might be different than telling me your plans for tonight. All require mental representations, but what you do with those mental representations differ. One may just be about recalling, a static. Another one might require that you dynamically use these representations to create something even more complex, which is more like a problem. So if I asked you what you did last night versus tell me a story about a girl who's a fourth-year student at Bilkent University, is staying at the dorms and something interesting happened to her, now that is going to be much different than you telling me what you did last night. Okay. And they master concrete operational tasks gradually. Some follow-up research on concrete operational thought. Culture and teacher practices affect performance on these tasks, so these tasks are not immune to cultural variability. For example, going to school gives experience on Piagetian tasks, meaning those children who have stayed longer in school but are the same age as others actually are more successful in these tasks. And conservation has been observed to be delayed often in tribal societies, possibly owing to their experience with objects. They might show good performance in some that are present in their cultures, but if, for example, they don't think about volume all that much, it might become a little bit more challenging for them, even though they're the same age as children in industrialized societies. And these, don't get me wrong, they're still problematic for us, right? We can still be fooled, us adults in industrialized societies. All right, cognitive milestones in middle childhood. Middle childhood is, when is middle childhood? It's basically until the beginning of ortaokul for us, okay? Middle childhood. So middle child is ilkokul, the first 5 grades you can think of. It's basically between 5, 6, and 10, 11. And then adolescence starts around 11, 12. Middle childhood, they think in more organized and logical fashion as compared to preschool children, obviously. They can engage in some conservation, class inclusion, and seriation, but their thinking is more concrete. They display more effective spatial reasoning. In adolescence, they have more abstract reasoning, and that's also not just confined to adolescence. We too have more abstract reasoning. They can engage in propositional thought, meaning they can reason about situations contradicting reality. What would have happened if Bilkent decided that it was going to get rid of all midterms and exams? Everything, well, I mean, something has to replace it, so everything would be project-based, so you would find yourself working in groups for longer periods of time. I know some of you don't enjoy that as much either. Because of this abstract way of thinking, adolescence is characterized by the presence of an imaginary audience. Imaginary audience is basically the adolescent is hyper-aware of themselves, and they imagine that others are watching. Not in a creepy way, but mostly because they think, oh, I need to look at my best, whatever best it might be. You know, I am too old to make sense of adolescent fashion. I'm even too old to make sense of college fashion. I see really, really ugly shoes, and people, I gather, pay a lot of money to find and wear them. I don't say a thing even when there are students that I see every day.
Moon boots.
Huh? I have no idea what they are. And so I am not there yet. I have given up. I have made peace with my age. And from here, it is only going to get worse. But the thing is, the adolescent feels like it is important for them to look the way they want to look, because everybody will notice they think. Everybody is looking, right? So small things become bigger. A personal fable is being formed. So they start telling a life story. What kind of person I am? Or what is happening to me? The events that I am involved in, my role in them. So they start thinking about themselves as a character, baş kahraman, in their own story. We will talk about all of this in emotion. And they have improved decision-making strategies. These are the good things. We will later talk about the fact that they may have improved decision-making abilities, which means if you give them a problem, they can reason in more complex ways. But you have been adolescents. You were just adolescents yesterday. I was once an adolescent. We know that although we're capable of more improved decision-making strategies, we don't use them all the time in adolescence. We will talk about that as well. There's also substantial still improvements to the frontal lobe. Executive functions are still developing and not. Okay, formal operational stage, it's 11 years and older, 11, 12. We have hypothetico-deductive reasoning, which is deducing hypotheses from general theories. I won't go into the pendulum problem. I can talk about it later after class if you wish. They can think about propositional thought, so they can evaluate the logic of verbal propositions. Again, go back to yesterday when you were adolescents. Didn't you ever spend long nights with friends where you just discussed things? No? Like, it could be politics, it could be like whether there's God, it could be like all these like weird things that aren't really relevant to what's happening tomorrow, but you sit down and talk about them, and you feel like you're saving the world. Yes? And so it's also this heightened, the ability to now start considering more than one abstract verbal proposition at a time. Okay, so you can still watch these videos. Very nice. Consequences of adolescent cognitive changes. Well, I already talked about these. Yes. Follow-up research. School-age children start developing abstract thinking skills. Yes. We said this, formal operations may not be universal. It is not clear whether every person in every society actually achieves formal operational. It is also not clear whether when you achieve formal operational, you keep thinking in formal operational ways about everything in your life, right? We talked about that. We often fall back on easier ways of thinking. We said, for example, we talked about pre-operational children making transductive reasoning. We make it all the time too, without knowing. That's why we keep telling ourselves correlation is not causation, right? Why do we have to remind ourselves that? Because it's so easy to make that error. Yes?
I don't know.
Which one?
Next one.
This one. Decision-making problems. This one?
Next slide.
Oh, this one.
I don't understand why these two are the problem with proposition two.
No, children may still show problems with propositional thinking. No, they aren't problems with, sorry. For example, they may not fully appreciate what logical necessity means. And they may not be able to think carefully enough major premises to understand what follows from those major premises. Okay, so we talked, I did, talk about Piaget. Does this guy have any relevance to our modern daily life? He does, more than you know. But the thing is, you're going to start looking for formal schooling too. Where are we going to send this kid for first grade, second grade? Now, many schools these days advertise active learning, hands-on learning, right? Learning by doing, değil mi? Yaparak öğrenme. And that is basically an outcome of Piaget's focus on action, right? It isn't coming from somewhere else. This active hands-on engagement thing is basically what we have taken out of what he has taught us. And he also drew our attention to children's sensitivity and readiness to learn. Why? Although we may dislike the idea of stages, what is it telling us? It's telling you that you can't just take a child at one stage, load him with information from this stage, and expect that child to perform, right? You need to recognize that in different developmental periods, children may make errors that are systematic, and they need to be guided on those errors. So all of those are more of a Piagetian influence on our thinking. Yes. Overall evaluation of Piaget's theory, he told us about these change processes, which many argue these days that they cannot, assimilation, accommodation, organization, cannot account for patterns of children's changes observed today. Cognitive development is not always self-generating, meaning there's a lot that is learned from the outside. So Piaget was trying to understand how a child could build logical thinking from their experience of the world, but this experience was mostly physical and non-social. But through social interaction, we also learn different ways of thinking too. And so it's not always self-generating in that regard. Cognition is not as broadly stage-like as Piaget expected. Some of them are more gradual, but his theory still inspires research. I can very confidently say in cognitive development, there is no one who has been as often talked about, cited, who has initiated so much research as he has. We don't celebrate him because he was the first, but these ideas, and we don't celebrate him because he was always right. But he brought a systematic view to cognitive development in the early 1900s. What's happening on Wednesday is that between 10:30 and 12:40, Ecem and Bahar are going to be at their offices waiting for you if you have questions. So this is, you use the time to study for the exam. If you do have questions, they're in the basement of the A building. You can run and consult them about your questions too. So they're going to be there. And we put it there so that we knew nobody had class, okay? And so if you do have questions, go see them. Chapter 6, Part 2, Core Knowledge Theories. What I'm going to do is in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to finish core knowledge theories, and I'm going to stop there. Vygotsky will not be on the exam. Everything until the last word I say today will be on the exam. Okay. What are domain core knowledge theories? So this is something that I think Banu might appreciate. Let's see if you will. So the question is, how do children acquire knowledge about the world? Is there one learning device that is general, or are there separate learning devices? You said no to both. Oh, you were saying there could be one general. Okay, there are general processes and specific processes that actually will make you happy, the core knowledge theory. And so this theory asserts that there is rapid privileged learning in some domains. And these domains could be about others' minds, psychological reality, about the physical world, physical reality, about biological entities, biological reality. It could be also about number. So this actually comes from more of an evolutionary perspective. It starts with innate special purpose knowledge systems. I'm not saying knowledge, I'm saying knowledge systems. And these are core domains of thought. And children make rapid advances in their understanding of these important domains, which are, to remind you, psychology, biology, physical world, number. They make fast advances because there are dedicated systems of knowledge. Yes?
I cannot understand the difference between knowledge and knowledge.
So I'm not saying that you are born with knowledge, but you are born with an inclination, huh? A learning mechanism, or a learning ability or also an interest in a system of knowledge, meaning like in biology, for example, where children, as they get more knowledge, they're going to make it one coherent domain. They're going to basically just add it to a separate, dedicated system of knowledge about that area only. Okay? Sure, we can. And here, in this view, development is domain specific. See, for Piaget, it was domain general. What are domains? They are, think of them as learning areas. Like number could be a domain, biology could be a domain. For Piaget, it didn't really matter what you were learning. He thought that at each stage, a characteristic way of thinking, of logic, was prevalent, and it applied to everything, right? But according to this, children start coming up with naive theories. What is Turkish for naive? Saf, aynen öyle. Saf teoriler. Meaning, those are not learned theories. Those are mostly guided by intuitions and a little bit of knowledge, okay? So they come up with some naive theories. For example, in psychology, they may come up with naive ways of thinking about why people act some ways. If they want something, they will try to get it, for example. It's a very naive way of thinking about desire. Okay. There could be, I won't go into this. So yes, these are the suggested domains of core knowledge. Yes. For example, let's think about physical knowledge. Here we're looking at the development of infants' physical knowledge. We understand that 2 to 3 month olds can understand that one solid object cannot move through another. There's an example of this in your textbook if you're interested. They do this with violation of expectancy or looking paradigms, and they basically see that infants are more surprised when a concrete object is able to pass through another. They expect them not to be able to pass through if there's no hole. They make size comparisons. They notice when objects are too wide for opening, so if something is trying to fit here but it's too wide, for example, it won't go through, right? Or too tall for containers. I don't have anything that's taller than my container because I chose the largest coffee mug available. But that's you can understand what it is. They understand that objects, when dropped, and I won't, they fall. And that they understand if an object is supported, it won't fall, right? So this will fall, but this won't. Simple. But these are all the basic building blocks of what we expect out of the physical world. For example, okay, if we had needed to compare this, remember Piaget, for example, at stage, infant retrieves partially covered object, right? If it was under a blanket. But if the object moved, it was easier for the child to retrieve the object. Others who have looked at naive physics, the core domain of naive physics, have termed this principle of cohesion. And they basically look at whether children expect objects to move as connected wholes. And they propose that early expectation is rooted in naive physics. Look at this, for example. This is an example of what I'm talking about. So if this was moving this way, but this was moving that way, it keeps going. When this screen is lifted, you expect to see this, correct? But if you see one whole one, then you would be surprised, right? So newborns, when the screen is lifted, prefer to look at the whole pencil, which means that they haven't yet developed the ability to think or reason that if these two are basically moving in opposite directions, they couldn't be one thing. I mean, now we can also think about an apparatus that could be one thing if you wanted to. Yes. It is not clear. Usually they look at impossible events more. But in many cases, they've also found that they have actually looked at possible more. As long as it is significantly different, they arrive at conclusions saying that the infant has detected a change or the infant is expecting this. I know it's not clear because it's not clear for me either. Because there really isn't one answer to this. And that's one of the problems with these looking paradigms, violations of expectancy. Sometimes you can get results that is still significantly different, but in the opposite direction, how to make sense of it. But that was a very good catch. Whereas older infants shift preference to too smaller pencils. This is another one. This is about whether objects can go through one another. And so it basically goes like this. Can I borrow this? And so let's say there's a screen. There's the infant. And the screen keeps going up and down like this, right? The baby gets habituated. Then there's an object that blocks its view. Now, what does the infant expect? When it goes like this, it should stop, right? It shouldn't go all the way down because now there is an object and it should stop. So if it goes through the object, so the infant sees the object, but by some illusion we make it go through, then the infant is startled. And infants as young as 4 months are startled if the solid screen goes through the solid object, which gives us the understanding then that they are quickly learning, even if they didn't know when they were born, an object property, which means that solid objects cannot pass through one another. Teşekkür ederim. And this has been argued also to be an indirect evidence of object permanence. Think of it. When the screen is going back and forth, as the screen goes, the infant doesn't see the object, right? But he expects the screen to stop. Expecting that screen to stop might signal to us that the infant understands there's an object they can't see which should stop the screen. Interesting, right? This is an extra bit of information. This is naive physics. 6.5-month-olds expect unsupported objects to fall. Of course. This is research, okay? So, and this is the shift that you will need to make. Many of you are also in laboratories working actively with data. Textbooks, psychology textbooks, and any kind of other textbook really, tries to make an introduction, but also simplifies things. What we are going to do when we get to Psych 350 is that you're going to see that with the things that we said here, you know, it's this way, it's that way, even for like, we say theory of mind is attained at 4.5 years of age, we're going to see there's a ton of research that very convincingly argues the other way around. How are we going to know anything if there's so much conflicting evidence? That's why theories are important. If you're coming from one theoretical perspective and you're able to critically think about the other theoretical perspective, it will put these data into perspective. So don't think of children as having object permanence or not having object permanence. Having children, so what does object permanence mean for you? For Piaget, it meant that children could act on the world in ways that assumed object permanence. Can a 4-month-old act on the world that can assume object? No. Can we say infants have sensitivity to object permanence? Probably yes. Can some argue that infants develop object permanence really fast because it's one of those naive theories that is important for survival? They can if they're coming from a different kind of theoretical perspective. It all depends on the argument you're making and how you're interpreting the data. There's also a lot of research that sometimes one theorist will take that piece of evidence and argue one way. Another person will take the same kind of evidence and argue a different way. That's why you cannot confine yourself to just empirical results. You will get confused. You need coherent, organizing frameworks of theory to guide your thinking. Okay, infants' numerical knowledge. Again, see, here I have note findings are mixed and controversial. So you remember this Mickey Mouse experiment, 2, Mickey Mouse 1, Mickey Mouse infant gets startled. Many people have not been able to replicate it. Others have replicated it. Some believe that this is very well established classical knowledge, that young infants actually discriminate between 2 and 1. Others don't. But it seems like they have some sensitivity up to 3. But we're not alone. Other intelligent primates also have the same capacity. So this really isn't what makes us human. Okay. And so they can understand the difference between large numbers versus in quantities, not like in number format. But if there were 8 dots in one screen and 2 dots in another, they seem to understand that one is more and the other one is less. We will talk about this with children with autism and children with Down syndrome in 350. We will go more into this ratio knowledge and whatnot. Okay. And so naive biology, this is more controversial in the sense that some theorists argue that this is a domain. Others think it's not a domain. And so, you know, with physics, with psychology, theory of mind, this is less argued, but this is more subject to criticism in that manner. We know that Piaget said that children attribute life to inanimate objects. Right? Why do trees have leaves? To keep them warm. In naive biology, do children actually start understanding biology in logical manner is the question. So the first ways of understanding, and there's a chapter in 350, we may get to do this, is children's understanding of what is animate and what is inanimate. When I say it like this, it sounds like it's such a complicated. It isn't. Think about it. Have you ever been startled? You're sitting outside B building, A building, somewhere outside at Bilkent. You're on a park bench or something. You're reading, you're looking at your phone, and all of a sudden something moves. Like you turn and look at what it is. It's usually a leaf that is blowing. When things move, we catch it from the corner of our eyes. Especially if they move in organic ways. What's organic? It seems like organic animate things, like animals, people, move a certain way that is different from mechanical things, cars, robots, right? And we seem to detect this with a lot of ease when it happens. When do infants and toddlers identify motion cues and link it to animacy? So if they see something moving, so let's say this moves. When do they understand that this is not animate? And how do they do that? And so it seems like children show a lot of improvement, and they use cues. They use cues about the type of motion. They use sudden changes in path of movement. There's a lot of cool research that looks at this. You know, there's research that has people or other simulated entities in dark spaces with light at the joint that moves, for example, and whether young children and infants actually perceive this as animate. So we will talk more about it. So this might be one area where children learn. An alternative view to Piaget's animism comes from Kyle, where he says preschoolers recognize the fundamental distinction between artifacts and animals. And he asks easier questions to children. He doesn't ask, why does the moon follow you? For example, he shows a chick and a chicken and said, what would this chick look like in a few hours? What would this chick look like in a couple of years? Do children understand that the chick will remain the same in a few hours, but will probably become a chicken in 1 and 2 years, right? or the same for inanimate objects, non-biological entities. What would this cup look like in a few hours, or what would this cup look like in a few years? Almost 40% of 4-year-olds and 50% of 5-year-olds seem to actually understand accurately or have accurate expectations of biological and non-biological entities. Hatano, another major researcher in this field, has proposed that children's naive biology is established around eating. I don't know about universal children, but Turkish people's understanding of biology is definitely centered on eating. Food is vital power. If you don't eat, you don't grow. Lack of food makes you sick, right? I want to add also cereyan, right? Yes. Yes. I love it. Somebody has posted on Moodle a baby fan for one of the forum questions. Is that person here? Baby fan? You. And you say it is not good for any person to be... Yes. Cereyanda kalmak kimse için iyi bir şey değildir. I love it. Okay, we will talk about it. Yes. Preschoolers' naive theories of biology also includes an understanding that only living things grow. Animals and objects have different insight. So they show children, for example, the inside of a watch versus the inside of a person or a cow. I mean, these are not graphic pictures, they're drawings. It's not like gory. And children can actually match and understand that something mechanical will have mechanical parts. And they understand that babies resemble their parents, meaning a baby cow will not look like a dinosaur. Yes. They understand gradually about, for example, colds, like flu, nezle, which can be gotten, versus inherited conditions like color blindness, which is not going to change. When explained what it is, they can reason about it. And they understand that animals heal, but broken baby dolls don't. Yes. Right. Is biology a core domain? This is my last slide. It develops later than other domains. There are a lot of psychological explanations for biological events, just like Piaget said there was going to be. And late development is common around the world. So it doesn't look like it's a privileged domain, but we have to know more. I'm going to stop right here.